Now, speaking to you from the control room of Studio 41 is Edward R. Murrow.
Good afternoon. In 1938, at the time of Munich, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain said of Czechoslovakia, "It is a small nation of which we know nothing." Today, there are many new small nations around the world of which we know very little. They are young in freedom, but old in culture and civilization. They, like we in the early days of our nationhood, want to stand aloof from the power struggles of the day. In short, they want to be neutral. Burma is such a nation. It's almost exactly halfway around the planet from here. In 1949, our foreign aid experts were inclined to write Burma off, a small nation, about 9/10 of it already in the hands of the communists, with only a very small army, and it was led politically by what was regarded as a religious fanatic, a little man who spent most of his time meditating. Burma today is still sovereign, also still neutral, but like other countries in the area, its major problem is to maintain its freedom and its neutrality. Our reporter on this visit to Burma will be Paul Niven. Our cameraman, Bill McClure.
Burma, Buddhism, neutralism. What is a neutral? It is an uncommitted nation. It is a land which considers itself in neither of the two massive power blocks which divide the world. Perhaps the most graphic way of defining Burma's neutrality is to report two events that happened on December 12, 1956, 9,000 miles apart. In Rangoon, high Burmese officials were greeting Premier Zhou Enlai of Communist China. This was at the very time when Zhou was defending the Russian butchery in Hungary. At virtually the same time in New York City, the Burmese ambassador to the United Nations, speaking in the name of the Burmese government and its people, was addressing the General Assembly, making what is perhaps the most direct attack any Afro-Asian neutral has made on a communist power.
No nation, large power or small power, has the right, though frequently large nations have the power, to coerce other nations. Its apologists say that the Soviet Union coerces Hungary to preserve communism for Hungary. But it has no right to do this, though obviously it has, up to the present, the power so to do. My government feels that it must voice this conscience, must express its condemnation. We do this to keep our self-respect. We can do no less. There, speaking of Hungary, but for the grace of God, go we.
This is the road to Mandalay. This guarded train, preceded by an armored pilot engine, takes 2 days to travel the 400 miles from Rangoon to Mandalay. Stops at night because of the insurgents. Currently, less than 10% of Burma is in the hands of the rebels. In 1950, more than 80% of Burma's land area was in insurgent hands. The insurgents, a collection of communists, Trotskyites, Karens, and bandits, total less than 10,000 in number. But at one time, they virtually paralyzed the new Republic of Burma, and even today, harass the government and its people. Every town in Burma, from Moulmein to Mandalay to Myitkyina, is sealed to traffic every night at dusk. Every bridge crossing the Irrawaddy or the Salween is guarded. Patrols constantly comb the jungle, which the armies of so many nations have cut their way through in the last 15 years. The Japanese, the Chinese, the Americans, the British. Burma is a country about the size of Texas, ringed by the sea and a horseshoe of high mountains, and no less than 6 different nations. India and Pakistan, in constant conflict with each other, but both friendly with Burma. Tibet, recently absorbed by Red China. Laos, recently carved out of Indochina. Thailand, which many Asians call an American satellite. And the giant monolith of communist China. the largest nation on Earth. And it is this 1,500-mile border with China which keeps Burma both neutral and vigilant. This is the sprawling city of Rangoon, near where the many mouths of the Irrawaddy empty into the Bay of Bengal. Rangoon is now swollen to a city of 750,000 because of the refugees who have streamed in from the rebel-infested interior. Many of them could go home now, but like other human tides, they tend to stay. Rangoon is the political, economic, and cultural capital of the country. This is Rangoon's modern university, 9,000 students. Professors never let their students forget that Burma was the third nation in the history of the British Empire to win its independence, the first two being the American colonies and the Republic of Era. Professor Cho Thet, who once taught history at Yale University, evaluates for his students the assets and liabilities that Burma inherited from the British occupation.
In the first place, it made possible, that is, the British occupation made possible, 3 decades of intense misery amongst 80% or 85% of the people. When the Delta was being opened up, after the Suez Canal was opened in 1870, the opening up was done by small units, small social units of single Burmese families who were dependent on the moneylenders for the first 2 years of their pioneer work in clearing the swamps and the mangrove jungles. They were dependent for the first 2 years on the money that they had to borrow from the Indian chettiars. And these chettiars in turn lent money to our Burmese cultivators at anything from 50 to 120% per annum. So by 1929, you have officially 75% of the agricultural land in South Burma in the hands of aliens, and unofficially perhaps much more than that.
The professor is also mindful that Britain helped Burma prepare for her independence.
There were many difficulties that Burma had to face to rehabilitate itself after the ravages of the war. You know, we were occupied for 3 years. We were bombed by both sides. Most of our towns were left flat. But nevertheless, there had to be a quick rehabilitation, a quick raising of the standards of the living of the people. And the totalitarian method seemed to promise, on the surface at any rate, a shortcut towards these goals. But our leaders were wiser. Perhaps they were wiser because the British taught us some of the values, some of the ideas which they themselves believed in, but which they probably did not bother to apply to us, all the way anyway. But these people, our leaders, decided once and for all that they would choose democracy and that they would probably have to work harder, but that in the long run, in the interests of the people and of our country, over a longer period, democracy was their cup of tea, that they would choose democracy. And therefore you have one more tangible evidence of what the British left us. Are there any questions that you want to make?
Is there any possibility of Burma entering into alliance like Southeast Asia Treaty Organization?
Well, I wouldn't like to handle that, but let me do it anyway. Our country is committed for the time being, and perhaps you'll understand why, for the time being to a strict policy of neutralism. I think largely this is to give us time to allow our country and our government and our armed forces to stand more firmly on their own feet. Perhaps later this question will arise in a much more urgent manner, and I should say that it is inevitable.
Democracy, Burma's cup of tea, as the professor put it, is modeled after the British parliamentary system. There are 2 legislative houses, of which the Chamber of Deputies with 250 members is the most important. All but 54 members of the House are members of the anti-fascist People's Freedom League, dominated by the patriot and philosopher U Nu. For all but one of Burma's 9 years of independence, U Nu has been its prime minister. For the past 8 months, U Nu has been out of the prime ministership and the cabinet, so that he could devote his time to ridding his political party of corruption, which has at times frustrated its democratic purposes. The prime minister, in his absence, is U Ba Sway, who presides over a cabinet whose average age is 40. and made up of men who, 15 years ago, were school teachers and resistance leaders in the British Empire, which ruled Burma almost as a subsidiary of India. Burma also has a president, U Ba U, who is really an elected sovereign, whose duties, like those of the former British Governor-General, are mostly ceremonial and diplomatic. But in the spirit of neutrality, the president has 3 automobiles: a Zeiss, presented by Bulganin and Khrushchev, a Rolls-Royce, presented by Her Majesty's government, and a Cadillac, purchased from General Motors. The Burmese woman is completely emancipated, both politically and socially, keeps her maiden name and property. Polygamy is legal, but as barrister Dormaya Thane told the American Women's Club of Rangoon,
you do understand that we recognize polygamy, and so a man is entitled to have as many wives as he can support. Thank heaven we have this high cost of living, and there are not many women, you see, who aspire to being in the harem. Since prehistoric times, we have always enjoyed an equality of status, rank, and opportunity with the men. And unlike the Chinese or the Indian neighbors, we have never been the chattel of a Burmese man. So nowadays you find that we have 25% of our Burmese women are in the university, and that all the learned professions are open to women.
Is it true that at the present time marriages are arranged here in Burma?
Yes, I think so. And they are quite successful, especially when the girls are young and the parents feel that the children should be married young.
Was your marriage an arranged marriage?
Oh, no. My mother couldn't find anybody for me, you see. I mean, I was very choosy. So I had to get one myself.
Do Burmese husbands help their wives with the dishes?
Heaven forbid. We have to uphold the dignity of the Lord and Master of the house.
The rebirth of Burma is the story of a man and his religion. The religion is Buddhism. The man is Unu. Unu says Buddha means enlightened one. Buddhism is the cement that holds Burma together. This is the Shwedagon. Kipling called it the waking, winking wonder, because this 326-foot pagoda, built before the birth of Christ, is annually encrusted by thousands of pieces of gold leaf, plastered on as offerings by pilgrims. But as Unu told reporter Niven, it is not by this pyramid of guilt that the new Burma will be built.
Unu, what are those men doing high up on the pagoda?
This needs a bit of explanation, you see. As a matter of fact, these concern more with the mundane affairs, you see, than with the religious affairs. Because when a man is sick, or when a man is demoted, or when a man is suspended, you see, from his job, he consults a fortune teller because he believes, you see, that he is suffering from ill luck. So in order to counteract that ill luck, he offers gold leaf to the pagoda, which he believes will bring some merit, which can counteract, you see, the ill luck which he is suffering from.
The person who pours water on an image of the Buddha is doing the same thing.
Is doing the same thing, yes.
But these are only superficial gestures.
Very superficial, very superficial. The real thing that matters, you see, is nothing but the meditation which can deliver one, you see, from all suffering.
Could you tell us a little about that, Unu?
I must tell you something from my own experience. I was born a Buddhist, so I became a Buddhist. And to tell you the truth, I was not a Buddhist in the true sense of the term till very recently. I was very much attracted to Buddhism, I mean genuinely attracted to Buddhism, only after I have learned that the truth of Buddhism can be tested Lord Buddha said quite boldly, you must not believe anything which you cannot test yourselves. And he also said that a person will go through 4 stages in this very life, not in the life hereafter. And when a person has gone through one of these stages, the mental transformation of that person will be so complete that it will give him enough conviction and faith to make him a genuine Buddhist. These words very much attracted me towards Buddhism. So I tried it myself, and not all of what Lord Buddha had said. A portion, because due to lack of time, as you know, I cannot possibly try all what he had said. And I had tried some portion of it, and I found that to be true. And since that time, I became a very much confirmed Buddhist.
How long does it take to achieve that state?
About a month.
Of more or less constant meditation?
Yes.
And only meditation?
It must be constant, yes, meditation.
You didn't do anything?
No, one is not supposed to do anything else. Meditate.
In a monastery, sir?
Yes, in a monastery. Not necessarily in a monastery. You can do it at home, so long as it is a quiet home.
Could you describe the state which one reaches at the end of this? Is the word serenity or confidence or?
It is quite definite, you see. It is not a vague thing. It is very clear. For instance, you see, you may be a Buddhist, or you may be a Christian, or you may be a Muslim, or you may be anything, you see. But if you ask that man whether he believes his own religion completely, if he is an honest man, he must tell you, you see, he must admit that sometimes he is assailed by doubts about his own religion, the religion he professes. The Buddhist will tell you the same thing. But when he reaches the first stage, that doubt is completely eliminated.
Have you found your Buddhist faith a help to you as leader of your party and as Prime Minister UNU?
Very, very much. Very, very much. Had it not been for my faith, you see, I would have been finished, you see, in 1948, 49, and 50, when the insurrection was at its height. Because everybody thought that we were finished. And we were not finished because of that faith.
In his time, UNU has translated Jefferson, Lincoln, Karl Marx, even Dale Carnegie for his fellow Burmese. He has also translated Buddhism for a great many Americans.
The Lord Buddha actually lived some 2,500 years ago. He was a prince, born to greatness and glory. But when he realized that there was so much suffering and misery in the world, he decided to become an ascetic or holy man and seek out a way of life that would free suffering humanity. He made a tremendous impression not only on his own followers, but also on all his contemporaries. And the story of his life was handed down by word of mouth from the generations to generations.
When UNU was a boy of 10, he received his first formal indoctrination in the concept of Buddhism with the Shinbu ceremony, just as this boy and every Burmese male have been doing for centuries. UNU explains that this is not to glorify a god, but an ideal.
The distinguishing feature of Buddhism is to be found in the practice of Buddhist doctrine. This involves the exercise of a rigid personal discipline designed to attain a serenity of mind, which in turn will lead to a way of escape from suffering and distress. In all countries, there is a desperate longing for peace. But peace, like war, begins in the minds of men. Many people throughout the world are beginning to realize this.
And from one generation to the next, the Burmese boys at the age of about 10 spend a week or so as a novitiate monk, emulating the life of Lord Buddha. There is no commitment that he will make monkhood his career. Like Lord Buddha, who gave up the luxury of a prince, the candidate is led in pomp and pageantry to a ceremony where he gives up his princely garments for the simple saffron robe of the order. His family watches as his head is shaved, a symbol of Buddha's decision to forego the pleasures of the world. The boy will live with the older monks in poverty and simplicity for at least a week, and if he chooses later on, for the rest of his life. For this week, his only possessions will be his robe, a needle, a string of beads with which he counts while meditating, a razor to shave his head with, a strainer to strain insects from his drinking water, lest he inflict suffering on any living thing, and finally, his begging bowl. The monk has no income. He arises at dawn and goes out barefoot along his route, carrying a lacquered begging bowl. From the devout, he receives his daily rice. Buddhists do not call this an act of begging. It is the monk's duty to receive, the housewife's to offer. If there is any sense of privilege involved, it is on the part of the giver, who has helped to perpetuate the monkhood, and therefore the teachings of Lord Buddha. The late morning meal at the monastery is the last of the day, even for our young friend. The monk cannot take any sustenance, not even tea or coffee, after 12 noon. The rest of his day is spent in studying and above all in meditation, which is the only real road to nirvana or ultimate purification. As Unu said, Buddhism is not a doctrine that has to be accepted on hearsay. It can be tested by anyone and rejected, or if at the age of 20 the young Burmese wishes to go on to ordination as a full-fledged monk, he can do so. Parts of the ceremony are read from lacquered strips of bamboo. The language is Pali, comparable to Latin in Catholicism. He is asked, "Are you a free man? Have you come with the permission of your parents? Have you any diseases? Are your alms bowl and robe complete?" There are hundreds of thousands of pagodas and shrines all over Burma, and it is almost impossible ever to be out of sight of one. Americans are somewhat too inclined to think of Buddhism principally in terms of the ornate temples at Mandalay and Pagan and Moulmein, and the elaborate water procession at Inlay Lake with its unique and world-famous leg rowers. But as Unu points out,
I think there is something very romantic about you Americans. Buddhists do not worship any idols. The image of the Lord Buddha symbolizes his teachings and his example, for which Buddhists have profound reverence. In much the same way, I think the cross, and for Catholics, the image of the Virgin Mary and the images of various saints, symbolizes for Christians the teachings and example of Christ. Anyone can become a Buddha if he practices the teachings of the Lord Buddha with sufficient diligence. We have great reverence for the Lord Buddha because he showed us the way to mental serenity. It is this reverence that we show when we kneel before his image, or making offerings of flowers, or burn incense in the pagodas.
The relationship of the philosophy of Buddhism to the doctrines of communism will be discussed later by Unu.
See It Now's report on Burma, Buddhism, and neutralism continues with reporter Paul Niven on the Stillwell Road.
This is boundary post 42. On the other side of it, the People's Republic of China, the beginning of the communist empire that stretches a third of the way around the globe. In that village, 100 yards away, a squad of red Chinese soldiers. On this side, the Democratic Free Republic of Burma, independent since 1948 after a century of British rule. Burma's population, 18 million, compared with Red China's 500 million. This frontier stretches more than 1,000 miles. Already it's been the subject of many disputes. Red Chinese troops have crossed it. Civilian settlers have crossed it, apparently having come to Burma with a purpose. This boundary post itself was moved under cover of dark one night by Chinese troops across the Stillwell Road on which I'm standing so that the road passed through China. The next night, the Burmese moved it back. The Burmese look across this road with a mixture of admiration and dislike. Burma admires Communist China's efficiency, the national unity, and the progress against disease and corruption. The Burmese dislike intensely the regimentation of communism, the denial of the right to be apolitical, and the anti-religious campaign which deeply offends religious people like the Buddhist Burmans. South of Burma lie Malaya, Singapore, Thailand, and the new countries carved out of Indochina. Their future, too, depends on keeping boundary post 42 in place. So, in the long run, may that of other nations a long way off.
Just down the road from boundary post 42 at Namkham is an American who has spent all of his life in Burma and on this road.
Ribbon, please.
Dr. Gordon Seagrave, former Baptist missionary, jungle surgeon who walked out of Burma with Stillwell in 1941's humiliating defeat, walked back in 1945 to find his hospital in the hills in total ruins. His nurses, too, representing all the races of Burma, have endured war and rebellion to win the gratitude and respect of the Burmese nation and hundreds of American GIs who owe their lives to them. Several generations of hill tribes, the Kachins, the Shans, the Palaungs, the Lishus, have had their malaria and their tuberculosis and their gonorrhea and their cancers treated by Daddy Seagrave and only him. His pay is $90 a month. Today, at 59, suffering from dysentery and malaria, partially the result of imprisonment by the Burmese for treason, he was later cleared. Seagrave is both old and a legend before his time.
Dr. Seagrave, just how far are you from the Chinese border?
Only a mile, really. It's just an air mile over to the tongue of China that comes into Burma here. And the lowest administrative point in communist China is right across there in that large village that you see across the river. And then the high mountains beyond that are back in Burma again. That makes a rather difficult border situation for Burma to take care of. Quite a number of the people from China come over here. We report to the government checks on their background, and if they're over here for real illness, the government gives us permission to go ahead and treat them, because that's part of the government policy is to treat them properly.
This is a rather explosive border situation you're living in, isn't it?
Well, we are actually sitting right on the lid. Of course, my first responsibility is to the government of Burma. I must not be the cause of trouble between Burma and China. And then my gratitude to Burma is so great that if an explosion ever occurred, if the lid ever blew off, what I would do then would be to offer my services to the army of Burma and take care of their casualties, just as long as I'm alive. That's the only way that I can discharge my responsibility to a country that's been as friendly to me as this country has.
Doctor, I think many Americans would be interested in hearing your story of how you were arrested and imprisoned in 1950 and 51.
My trouble was that we had been serving Burma for so many, many years, well over 100 years, that I thought I was above suspicion. Then another thing that got me into trouble was the fact that I was born among the Karens, and the first language that I ever learned was Karen. And they believed, of course, that my heart was with the Karens, you see.
You were arrested here?
Yes. I was actually finishing my morning coffee when they came to the house. And I was taken down to Rangoon, and then I was given the chance to get out of the country without a trial.
Why didn't you?
I didn't want to leave here as a traitor. I didn't want the people in Burma to believe that I was a traitor. I didn't want the people in America to believe that I was guilty of treason against this country. Americans loved the people of Burma. The Americans that fought here in Burma loved the people of Burma. And if I'd gone back to America without a trial, I would have merely convicted myself of treason. And I didn't believe I was guilty of treason. Now, I didn't know, actually, what the state of justice was in Burma, I'll admit. And there at the beginning, I felt that I was being abused. But one of my fellow prisoners in the jail said, I didn't need to worry about the justice of Burma. That was one thing that Burma had a right to be proud of. And he was right.
Was your lawyer an American, Dr. Seagrave?
My lawyer was anything but an American. My lawyer was a Burmese, one of the finest men in Burma. Some of my old friends of the China-Burma-India Theater wrote me a letter from Denver saying that they would send one of these high-powered American lawyers out here to defend me. And I didn't want that because I wanted to trust the justice of the people of Burma. I think that would have been the worst mistake I ever made if I'd brought an American lawyer out here to pound on the table and do that sort of thing. It was much better being cleared by Burmese.
Doctor, how is America doing in this part of the world?
I think America is doing a whole lot better than Americans sometimes realize. There was a bit of a strain back there at the time of that the nationalist Chinese aggression was taking place in Burma. Because for months after it began, America didn't seem to pay any attention to it. And they were tearing this country apart. And just because they used the word nationalist, America seemed to think that that aggression didn't amount to much. That it was justified in some way or other. And some Americans claimed that these were the only Chinese that were really fighting the communists, and therefore Burma ought to be more tolerant. Well, I didn't feel that way at all, because the Chinese nationalists had been around here and had been shooting things up right and left. They weren't here to base themselves for a drive against China at all. They were here just for their own personal aggrandizement. But then, as soon as President Eisenhower got well settled into the presidency, he began to get reports from the ambassador in Rangoon, and American reaction changed, and America helped get rid of those people, and I think American prestige went up immensely.
The business of Burma is rice, and unlike other underdeveloped countries of the world, no matter what happens, Burma eats. It raises 8 million bushels of rice a year, more than it can eat itself, and more than it seems able to export. This is the farm of U Maung Ji, who, like 85% of the population, is a rice farmer. As the professor at Rangoon University said earlier, before independence, most of Burma's rice fields were owned by absentee landlords. And until 1947, U Maung Ji was a tenant farmer, barely managing to eke out a living. Then came nationalization of the land, and he was given 20 acres to run as his own, and 30 more that the government holds but lets him run. Land is assigned according to the size of a man's family, but 50 acres is the maximum permitted. There is little mechanization of agriculture in Burma. U Maung Ji has no tractors, no threshers. The threshing is done by the hands of Maung Ji, his wife who smokes cheroots, and his 10 children. In the socialist-type economy of Burma, hulling is done by the State Marketing Board mill, which fixes price and exports it. After expenses, U Maung Ji nets about $320 a year, which is considered good. He says if he had more capital, he would start a small cigar-making business. Farmer Ji knows only vaguely that Burma's major problem is her one-crop economy, and recent efforts to sell some of the surplus to the United States misfired because we ended up selling it to Pakistan, ordinarily a big customer of Burma. He also knows something about the recent barter deal, in which Burma swapped its rice with Russia for cement and heavy equipment. But this ended in bitter disillusionment for the Burmese, who were shortchanged. In an effort to free itself of the hardships of the one-crop economy, which means that Burma has to buy almost everything she needs in foreign markets, the Burmese government has gone into several diversified industries. This modern plant in Rangoon makes vaccines, antibiotics, and other vital pharmaceuticals. The plant, built by a British contractor, is being run by a British pharmaceutical firm on a contract basis and will be turned over to the Burmese in 1960 when they hope to be able to run it by themselves. There are those critics in and out of the country who claim the Burmese lack know-how and are an indolent and lazy people, and that present-day Rangoon is a squalid monument to this. It is true that the literacy rate is low, and the Burmese government has launched an adult education plan to counteract this.
It is our job to rebuild Burma materially as well as morally. Mass education aims at wiping out disease, poverty, and ignorance among people. And at the same time, making them realize their new responsibilities as citizens of an independent sovereign state. And this is the opportunity, the challenge mass education offers you. Because it is you who must work this program. On you who will go into the field depends the success of this program.
The mass education plan has already sent more than 1,000 teachers into the field to teach well digging, latrine building, malaria control, home construction, and just plain reading.
Kaya bala, Yana bala, Bala ngaba, Jaja nana, Ataba, Hawana dala, Kana dala, Ataba, Hawana dala.
As in Africa and other parts of Asia, the most exciting thing to be seen in Burma is a group of adults learning to write their own names.
Daga da, Daga ba, Daga wa. Mami ba? Sa da ba wa. Kaya bala. Jaja nana. Jaja nana.
The United Nations has several teams working in Burma, as does the Ford Foundation. But there is no Point 4 or any other official U.S. government aid. UNO stopped it in 1953 in token of his non-alignment policy. Burma now desires U.S. aid, but insists on paying it back. And unfortunately, there is no category for this. Louis Walensky, an American economist employed by the Burmese, talks about this.
Burma is making rather steady progress toward overcoming her problems. Given time, I think she can solve them by herself. But with communist China on her border, she feels she doesn't have very much time. The United States has helped Burma, wants to help her now. Burma wants to pay for the help she gets. To me, it's ironic that it is easier for us to extend aid on a gift basis or on a grant plus loans basis than on a loans repayable basis. We've imposed so many restrictions to ensure that nations which receive our gifts use them in ways we approve. This isn't altogether appropriate for a country which will repay 100% the help she gets. Equally important, we just can't seem to move fast enough in these matters. For these reasons, our aid to Burma thus far has been too little, too late, and too complicated. If not for this, I think Burma today and our position in this part of the world would be stronger than it is. If we Americans want to help struggling democracies like Burma to achieve their objectives and to build with us a free and better world, we should shake off these self-imposed restrictions that hamper our efforts and frustrate our national purpose.
Another symbol of Burma's freedom is the freedom of the press, and nowhere in Asia is it practiced with more vigor than by Ed Law Yon, editor of The Nation. It was Law Yon, rather than the government, who announced to Burma and the world that Chinese communist troops had violated Burma's northern border. Like Jefferson, he trusts newspapers more than the government. Like Jefferson, he opposes single-party rule.
It will be realized that although we have a parliamentary form of government, Parliament is not in fact well established in this country. There is a preponderance of a one-party rule, which to me is in the long run as dangerous as having autocracy. Much as I respect and admire the leaders of the present government, I hold entirely with the view that power corrupts and that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, we have been critical, as I said, about the government both on domestic and foreign policy. I have said repeatedly that I do not believe neutralism to be a safe policy. Perhaps at the present juncture in our history, there is no substitute for neutralism. Perhaps it will have to endure for some little time. But while we sit on the fence, being friendly with both blocs, I think, and I'm sure our government is realizing it too, that in our own interests, in the interests of our safety, we should try to make the democracies morally and physically strong. There is a spectacle in Burma of too much money chasing too few goods. In desperation, therefore, we have had to enter into barter deals with the communist bloc. These barter deals have not done us much good, but they were entered into in the first instance because it's a kind of vicious circle. We had to get rid of our rice, and we had to go in for imports of capital goods and heavy machinery. We knew from the very beginning that we were not going to get the kind of goods at the prices that we were used to pay. But it was better than not getting anything at all. But looking back now, I think that the whole thing has been a blessing in disguise. We have found out in the hard school of experience that goods that we have been used to buying from the West are cheaper and definitely superior to the goods that we can procure from the communist bloc. Regardless of what the future may hold, regardless of the outcome of the negotiations which our government is entering into with the communist China over the whole border question, I believe that my countrymen, now fully aroused, realize that it would be foolish to put implicit faith in the communist leaders.
Every capital in Southeast Asia has its Chinatown, and often the biggest and most powerful bank in town is a communist Chinese bank, controlled from Beiping, which uses it as an instrument of subversion. To get a loan from this bank, a Burmese Chinese has to promise to educate his children at a communist school. The Chinese community in Burma is still divided, but every national holiday sees them displaying fewer Chiang Kai-shek flags and more hammer and sickles. UNO has banned the Communist Party in Burma, but in the interest of freedom, permits the widest latitude in political demonstrations, particularly among the students, many of whom are communists in everything except name. While we were there, a Rangoon University election returned the communist-dominated student government by a majority of 2-1. But even those in the university who oppose the communists also oppose any alignment with the West and contend that neutrality is strictly a matter of geography.
The American people would like to know why Burma is neutral. And as a student, I would like to explain why our government took this step. As you know, our close friend like India is neutral too. India and Burma are neutral countries. Burma is neutral, why? Because you can look at the geographical situation we have. Our country is situated right close to Red China. That's a communist nation. I don't think Red China would invade us. because I believe in the terms making between ex-Prime Minister U Nu and Prime Minister of Red China, Chao En-lai. That's why we can trade with China, and we can trade with the West and also America. If we side with America, if we side with the American bloc, do we have freedom to have a friendlier relation with the Chinese and the Russians, and also have trade with them? I don't think it will be possible.
We end our report on Burma where it began, with U Nu at the Shwedagon.
Do you think there is in the West any basis for a moral appeal or a moral fervor that can hold its own against the material appeal of communism?
I do not want you to underestimate the moral appeal as against the material appeal of any ism, you see, in the world. Because I'm quite confident that it will be the moral appeal that will ultimately triumph.
Does communism have a moral appeal, and if so, is it a genuine one?
I do not think, you see, the communism has any moral appeal, because I want to tell you some of the, experiences of my own. From 1948 to 1950, for 3 years, more than 9/10 of the country had been in the hands of the insurgents. The slogans of lands to the tillers, factories to the workers, and so on, caught the imagination of the people more easily than anything else we could possibly say to these people at that time. And so most of the people supported the insurgents. And at that time we had no arms. And what was worse was we had no soldiers to fight the insurgents. But we kept on saying to the people this: yes, you may get lands, you may get factories, and you may even get all the things you want from the government stores under the insurgents. But, mind you, you will lose the fundamental freedoms which you must possess as a human being.
Did people learn that lesson, do you think?
After some time they realized that what we told them was quite true. And since that time, quite a lot of people who had given support, shelter and food, you see, to the insurgents, turned away from these people. And in certain cases, these people fought them with whatever arms they possessed. And now, you see, more than 9/10 of the country is in our hands. And I must tell you that our triumph over the insurgent is the triumph of the moral appeal over the material appeal.
You've often said that one of the worst things about the Burmese communists is that they take orders from their foreign masters. Well, presumably those foreign masters are in China and Russia, and yet when you go to Moscow or Beijing, everything is very friendly. We in the West don't quite understand this, sir.
Are we friendly only with the communists? Are we not friendly also with the anti-communists?
Yes.
Then why is it, you see, that this friendship, you see, with the communists should puzzle you in the West? Why?
Well, I think it puzzles us.
We are friendly with
everybody.
everybody.
But not with the Burma Communist Party, which is outlawed.
Yes. It was outlawed because they were not communists. They were outlawed because they tried to overthrow the government by violent means. If they like to contest in the, elections and seize power through democratic means, they will be given, full freedom to come and contest in the elections.
I see. One of the characters in your play, The People Win Through, says that communism in China and communism in Burma are not at all the same thing. Could you explain that?
Yes. Communism in China means the raising of the standard of living of the people, whereas communism in Burma means taking orders from outside, as you told me just now.
Do you feel that the accomplishments of the Chinese communist government match up or outweigh the loss of freedom that has taken place there?
I was not long enough in China, you see, to find out all these. But I must tell you that I gave a good deal of credit, you see, to what the Chinese leaders are doing for their own people. Yes, they are very much devoted to the welfare of the Chinese people.
Do you think the United States should recognize Communist China and that she should be admitted to the United Nations?
Yes. You may not believe in communism, you see. For instance, I don't believe in communism myself, but I recognize China.
Everyone with whom we've talked here in Rangoon indicates that Burma wants socialism permanently as a way of life. Now that you've visited the United States, Unu, do you still feel that American-style capitalism is not relevant to Burma's problems?
The conditions in the United States and in the countries in Asia are quite different. So if we introduce American-style capitalism into the countries in Asia, I think it will bring about undesirable economic discrepancies. The rich will become richer, very much richer, and the poor will become very much poorer. So in that case, it will bring about much discontent and dissatisfaction, you see, throughout Asia. Then I believe it will be a sure means of installing communists in Southeast Asia. So I do not want American-style capitalism to be introduced into Southeast Asia.
Sir, in a See It Now interview with you 3 years ago, Senator Margaret Chase Smith asked you if you had any criticisms to make of American policy. You were very polite, as I remember, but you said you thought American politicians talk too much. Do you still feel that way?
Yes, but I don't find fault seriously with the Americans for talking too much. In America, you know very well, you see, there is freedom of speech. So they enjoy it to the fullest extent. That is the reason. Yes.
When you look at this great nation of ours from the outside, even from Burma, you realize that in terms of freedom, our example may be quite as important as our dollars. Good night and good luck.